Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the Lockdown LitFest. As ever, we hope you're keeping safe. We hope you're keeping well. And as we are now beginning to reduce the grip on lockdown, or the government is, we hope that you're continuing to take good care of yourselves and those you love. We have a hell of a show for you today with an extraordinary man, an extraordinary writer, an extraordinary author. Robert Twigger is both an author and a poet. He's won the Newdigate Prize for Poetry, the William Hill Sports Book of the Year Award, and the Somerset Maugham Award. His 12 books have been translated into over 20 languages and cover both fiction and non-fiction, memoir and travel, and he divides his time between Cairo and London. He also, not a lot of people know this, has published some poetry collections, including one with, in 2003, with Nobel Prize winning Doris Lessing, who was an old pal of mine and is much missed. Robert, a very warm welcome to the Lockdown LitFest. First of all, can I ask you, whereabouts in the world are you? Where do we find you?
Well, right now, I've been locked down in Dorset, which is not a bad county to be locked down in. I think I can recommend it.
What sell us Dorset. What's so great about being locked down in Dorset?
Dorset's, I think it's a great county. I think it's one of the very few in England with no motorways. So it sort of gets bypassed. And I mean, of course it has tourists, but they seem to be speeding on their way to Devon and Cornwall. So it is slightly less busy. But for lockdown, it's been damn quiet. I mean, going down to the beach at night, you know, when you're not supposed to, it's been really pleasant.
How very lovely. I'm rather jealous that you're by the sea. And then on Wednesday, I'm interviewing Lewis Pugh, who is the United Nations Patron of the Oceans, who is locked down in Cape Town. In sight of the sea, but is unable to swim in it because he's not allowed. He's very, very jealous of penguins right now.
Gosh, I bet he was. He's the guy who swam in the Arctic, didn't he?
He's from the Arctic, the South Pole, the North Pole. He swam the Channel a year or two ago, not across, but lengthways, in order to raise awareness for marine protected areas. Anyway, we're here to talk about you. Okay. I was interested. I mean, I've always been fascinated by your writing. You and I've had the joy of interviewing you a few times in the past. There are a couple of things that spring to mind that when there's usually a trigger point for the books that you are writing. And if you don't mind, I'm going to use the Pitt Rivers Museum and a birch bark canoe. Can you talk us through how that triggered what turned into a fantastic voyage, led to the book Voyager across the Rocky Mountains in a birch bark canoe, and what the process is for Robert Twigger from that initial idea to planning an expedition to then writing about it? Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford is one of the great museums, and even though they've tried to tinker with it, they haven't completely buggered it up, which is fantastic. In other words, it's a museum organized by items. So musical instruments from all around the world are in one area. Clothes are in one area, military weapons, and it used to have it still has, in fact, a dugout canoe and an outrigger canoe, and I remembered that from my childhood. And it also has a Canadian birch bark canoe, but I didn't remember that at all. I mean, maybe it sunk in without me remembering. Anyway, one time in Oxford, I mean, this was 20 years ago, visiting a museum, I knew I needed to do a new trip. And I saw that canoe for the first time, high up in a sort of darkened corner. And it just brought back a whole sequence of memories. As a child, I was fascinated by the Canadian Northwoods. So I was fascinated by the idea of voyageurs. And my father had given me this book, The Young Fur Traders. And there was a TV series at the time called Centennial, which is all about fur trading. So all this stuff from a kind of that I've been exposed to sort of came to, I suddenly thought, oh, well, look, there's the canoe. It's in the Pitt Rivers. You obviously can build them. And from then on, I started to do research into finding people who could make one. Or I ended up helping a guy make one. I mean, he did all the heavy lifting. Me and another guy helped him. And then we set off to try and replicate the first crossing of North America, which by Europeans. Now, it wasn't done by Lewis and Clark. It was done by a Scotsman, Alexander Mackenzie, and he had 9 companions, voyageurs. 2 were Native Americans, the rest were were French Canadians, and they took 2 years, essentially 2 years, to cross Canada. So we ended up taking 3 years because it was a very steep learning curve. But that was I ended up writing the book Voyager, and that was an amazing experience. And it started a long way back. And I think for most of my books, I'd like to think I could just come up with an idea, but usually what happens is I have the idea, and about 10 years later or longer, it comes to some sort of fruition. But there is always a point where you think, yes, now I'm going to do it. So and suddenly it becomes serious. And often it's about having an image in your mind. I mean, a birch bark canoe on a river, that was kind of like the guiding image for that one. Otherwise, it's too thin, because an expedition is such a it's often such a big undertaking. There are so many details, you'd be overwhelmed by them unless you had some kind of guiding image that keeps you going.
That's very well put. So talk us through the image, which is sort of encapsulated in the title of Angry White Pajamas, and how you ended up training with the Tokyo Riot Police, which I think was the first book I interviewed you for back in 1998.
That's right. Yeah, and on the good old Word program in Charing Cross Road. Yeah,
one word radio. Good memory.
One word radio. That was a classic stop on the route because it's just down from Foyles. But anyway, yeah, that book, Angry White Pajamas, like lots of kids, I'd always dreamed of getting a black belt, being a kung fu fighting master, and yet the kind of nuttiness of it sort of put me off really as a kid. And then when I got in my 20s, I did do a little bit of training in England, but it all was lackluster. But I ended up in Japan teaching English, and in Japan, martial arts are not very sexy. They're not a cool thing to do. Like, uncool people do martial arts, like playing, I don't know. It's not as bad as Morris dancing, but it's closer on the spectrum to Morris dancing and maybe rugby than it is to something cool and dangerous. So
I just have to say, Robert, for those of you who are Morris dancers, you're cool. Don't worry.
Well, I've changed my mind now. I actually think Morris dancing is cool, but in those days, I mean, it was like, God damn it, Morris dancing. But anyway, so I was there in Japan, and because of this different approach, it seemed absolutely normal to start training, and so I did, and I quite fortuitously started at a dojo that was the dojo used by the riot police for their training. And after about a year of training, I then applied and joined this course that they run, and it was a very, very intense course. So, and the purpose of that was that I knew I would never really become any good at Aikido if I just pottered along, doing an hour here and an hour there. So it was a design, and I knew I could get a book out of it as well. I mean, it was a twofold thing. I thought, even if I'm no good at martial arts, I'll get a book out of it, and let's give it a go. Let's really. I think everybody in their lives, you reach a point. I was 29 then.
Yeah.
You want to just put everything behind you, put your shoulder right behind something. And I'd never studied very hard at university or anything like that. So this was maybe some kind of belated attempt to commit.
Well, you certainly committed. I mean, by the way, I'm not oblivious to the connection that although Aikido is practiced in Angry White Pajamas, in a way, so is Morris dancing, and they've got bigger sticks. You not only committed to that. I mean, that was the book that won you both the Somerset Maugham Award for Literature and also the William Hill Sports Book of the Year Award, which is a hell of a diversity of prizes. And
actually, Waterstone in 2007, all Waterstone staff voted for their best sports book for the last 25 years, and it won that as well. So it really, really did me proud, that book.
It really did you proud, and it keeps you going. Let's come to your latest writing now, then, because the one which I'm delighted to say I've received a copy of, Walking the Great North Line, subtitle From Stonehenge to Lindisfarne, to discover the mysteries of our ancient past. What was the trigger for this? Because this doesn't seem to have had an image in the mind, other than, of course, Stonehenge and Lindisfarne, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, again, this is probably goes back to childhood. When I was growing up, 1970s, walking the Pennine Way, walking Hadrian's Wall and the
Yep.
Pennine Way were two kind of like, that was what you did, you know, and somehow it seemed tremendously exciting as a kid growing up to do those things. And I never did. I managed a couple of long distance walks, the Ridge Way, which is quite short, Cleveland Way. And on all of these walks, I usually did them with my friends, and I was in the Scouts. So did them with Scouts. I always usually end up giving up with blisters or something. So I'd had in my mind a long time to do a walk up England, but obviously I wasn't going to do just the Pennine Way. I needed to think of something a bit more interesting than that. So it had been kicking around a long time. What kind of route could I do? And totally by chance, I looked up, I think on the internet, the latitude and longitude of, well, I knew that Avebury and Stonehenge were supposedly on the same north-south line.
Yep.
And I checked them, and that's true. And then I started looking up other ones, like Salisbury, Old Sarum, that's on the same north-south line. So then I bought the Ordnance Survey map of ancient sites, which is this huge, big map, and drew a line through those and just continued it going up, and it goes through Lindisfarne Island. So it was just such an amazingly suggestive coincidence. What shocks me, some of the reviewers have got this, but this is like an incredible coincidence, because if you draw lines every 10 miles either side, which I did, something like as many ancient sites. Needless to say, in between those two, there are lots of ancient sites like Thor's Cave and Ilkley Stone Circles, Mantor, lots of them, all the way down to Hengistbury Head. So even though this book was not going to be a nutty book about all the significance of that, I just wanted to say that was a very interesting and very difficult thing to explain in our current way of thinking. So that's why I didn't want to push it too much. But that was the starting point. And the guideline was really, as a kid, I was very interested, like everyone, in these long distance paths, and also in ancient remains like Wayland's Smithy. That was a sort of place I went to many times.
Yes, I mean, so you're walking south to north, 1 degree 50 west, up the spine of Britain, and there are over 30 historical landmarks, as you say, from Meehan Hill, Thor's Cave, Mamtor to Arbor Low. I mean, it is quite a suggestive coincidence. What I love about this book is that you veer off track, not only physically, but also intellectually, mentally, and spiritually with this. The question I'm really asking is this: did you set out to prove that maybe there's something that we've missed in the old relics of Britain, something sort of Neolithic, that somebody knew something that we have now forgotten, that actually it's not by accident that these sites fall on this longitude?
Yeah, I mean, proof brings us back into the realm of science, and it was an attempt to definitely to show their significance, definitely to try to show by the fact that they are aligned that ancient man, it's really hard to lose sight of that, because our current culture is sort of predicated on the fact that ancient man was a kind of blithering idiot. And modern man is really smart, and we're constantly, of course, being reminded that we aren't really smart. But it's really important to know that in ancient times there were people who were like Einstein or Gauss or Goethe or Tolstoy, whoever. Of course, they had no written language, but we know from when you record, for example, storytellers from traditional cultures, they can have up to 9,000 songs and stories completely to memory. Phenomenal intellectual capacity, knowledge of plants and animals, far superior to the average person. And that needs to be borne in mind. The ancient man was just as intelligent as us, but their means and method of communication was different. So that's all we've got. This line is their only means of communication with us. So is it possible to resurrect something from that? And that's really was my plan. And I think I did, but it was very subjective. I mean, and probably yeah, it was, you know, in the modern parlance, very subjective. But I think there is something going on, yeah.
I mean, the weird thing, of course, we have to point this out, that a lot of the sites that you visited are Neolithic, pre-Neolithic.
Yeah.
Lindisfarne, of course, is most famous for being a Christian site.
Yeah.
But you sort of posit that in order for the Christian site to have been built, that must have been an importance pre-Christian. Is that?
Well,
And
actually, there have been even as early as Paleolithic remains found on Lindisfarne Island. So there are significant finds there. So, you know, it is proven that ancient man did inhabit that island. So, but based on the walk, quite a lot of Christian buildings are repurposed ancient sites. For example, Alton Priors, the church, you can actually lift up two sections of the floorboards and see sarsen stones underneath, the original standing stones. Many churches are built on a slight mound. They have a circular graveyard. All of these are repurposed traditional sites. And why not? I mean, this is what religions do. You know, mosques become churches and churches become mosques, you know, with a different dispensation. And in the past, the same thing happened with ancient sites.
Absolutely well argued. Let's talk about the walk. How fit are you and how keen a walker are you?
Right now, I'm bloody unfit because of lockdown, lassitude and laziness. But as I started that walk, I was fairly unfit, I would say. I managed to develop a bad Achilles tendon, but I sort of limped on. I love all the technical details, walking, the boots, the kit, and all of that. Some of that is in the book. So I think it does function slightly as a manual for people who want to, because walking has progressed so far in the last 20 years. Gear is so good that there isn't an excuse really to be a kind of knackered, overwhelmed hiker like there used to be, where you have a massive pack and inappropriate footwear. The gear is really, really good. I mean, I can drill down into detail if you want, but
well, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to ask you, because you and I, in fact, I think you're 20 days younger than I am, so we're both sort of knackered old men in a way. You have discovered the joys of walking poles, which I despise and loathe with a passion.
Right.
You're a great evangelist for them. Can you explain why, please, Robert?
Okay, yeah. I mean, walking poles divide the world. They do look silly. I mean, if you've done any skiing, your first reaction is, where's the bloody snow? You know, what are you doing? So I first saw walking poles in the Pyrenees. I thought they were absolutely ludicrous. I thought they were sort of like a total affectation. Finally, I did a long walk in the desert. I walked 700 kilometers through the Sahara Desert without walking poles. Guy next to me, constantly on my left, had walking poles. At the end of that walk, I think I'd worn away part of my hip bone, and he looked in perfect nick. So I thought, maybe there's something about these walking poles. The advantage of walking poles, if you're walking on a uniform surface like sand, is that you can subtly shift your weight onto the poles and just give your feet slight, different experience. You can alter how much wear and tear you get on your feet and your ankles. Walking poles, I use them as the tent poles for the tent, so there's a kind of a real reason for that. I'm not always walking all the time with them, but there are times when they're like comforting old friends, and you've got your walking poles. I mean, they can create bad habits. I mean, sometimes when you're going on a very difficult terrain, sometimes you're looking for somewhere to place each pole, and you can actually be a bit more less nimble-footed than if you're without poles. So they're not an unalloyed advantage. I mean, crossing rivers, they can also lull you into a false sense of security, because actually one big, thick, heavy stick is better than two little spindly walking poles. But I like them. And some poles, I mean, the ones I use, pacer poles, have an angled grip, so they really do give you extra push. So you're converting some upper body strength into walking. So you will be able to go further, carry a heavier load. Generally, it's better. Going up hills, they do help if you're clawing your way up a hill.
Right.
Yeah.
You've very kindly given the name away, so we're happy for this to be. We're happy to receive sponsorship from Pacer Poles for giving your product a bit of a push. And while we're pushing products, you mentioned your acknowledgements, Cedar Tree Industries, who very kindly gave you a packer. Can you explain what a packer is?
Well, that's very nice of you. I'll have to tell the guy when I finally send the book, which I have to
just give us a quick 30 seconds on the packer.
Okay. The packer is I mean, I should perhaps be wearing it. It's the ideal garment for. I was just telling my daughter the other day, I got caught in this terrible storm in France, and of course it wet my rucksack, and I had a laptop in, and it was really close, touch and go, where the laptop would recover. The packer is basically a coat made of totally waterproof, very thin material, but it has a bulge that goes over your rucksack, so you don't get the bite of the rucksack into the Mac, which is what causes the build-up of sweat. It doesn't matter whether you're wearing Gore-Tex or anything. That stopping off of the circulation of hot, damp air within your body is what causes the sweat build-up, and eventually you overheat. So this thing cuts around that because it's all loose. So it's actually the perfect garment. And especially pottering around a campsite, it's pouring with rain, you're packing up your tent, everything's getting wet. You can't really use an umbrella at that point, because I'm a great believer in umbrellas as well. The packer is the instrument to use, and they're pretty light. So I was thinking the other day, for comfort, and if I knew it was going to rain, as you can check the weather forecast, and if it was going to be significant rain, definitely take it with me, because it's just it just takes the edge off. I mean, it doesn't matter, you've got your ordinary waterproofs on, but if your rucksack's sopping wet, everything may or may not be wet inside. Hopefully it won't be, but it's just, everything gets that gradual wetness.
Exactly.
and this stops it.
While we're on kit, you've introduced me to something that I never thought even existed or somebody would invent, or see these two words jarred next to each other in a sentence, which is the words rain and kilt.
The rain kilt.
Please, can you describe the rain kilt for your
I love it so much.
Adoring viewers.
Somewhere over to my left, but I won't look away and try and get the rain kilt. No, the rain kilt, again, is a step too far for many people, like poles. And if you're walking with poles and a rain kilt, expect to be treated with derision.
Mercilessly.
A pub. Anyway, okay, the rain kilt, absolutely genius idea. It's made of something called Cuban fiber, which was developed from racing boat spinnakers, I think. It's 100% waterproof, incredibly lightweight. So the rain kilt itself weighs about 60 grams, which is nothing. I mean, it's less than an ounce. And it can ravel up around your waist, so it looks like you're wearing a belt of sorts. And then as soon as it starts raining, you just pull it down to around just above your knees, and it serves that marvelous function, because everyone knows, ever since outdoor gear started to mimic climbing gear, the coats are too short. So as soon as it starts raining, it just dumps all the rain onto your legs and the tops of your thighs, and your wallet gets all soggy and things like that. So what this does is it just takes that water down and off the knees, so your legs aren't getting wet. Now, of course, the wonderful manufacturers who develop these short raincoats also want to sell you rain trousers, but wearing rain trousers is sweaty and horrible, and you don't want to wear them most of the time. So the rain kilt solves all those problems. And worst case scenario, if your trousers have become hideously ripped or worse, you could possibly, proceed to the nearest shop in the rain kilt.
You could, but why would you? Let me ask you this, Robert. You walked the length of it. What did you learn about contemporary Britain through doing this walk? It struck me that you came up with a number of surprises. You're fairly mean about Birmingham as you cross Birmingham, but you seem to be very surprised and rather delighted at just how green the United Kingdom is still.
It's so true. I mean, if I wanted to get a snapshot of England, and this is a bit like that, it's this dead straight line. It's a bit one of those biological experiments. And pretty much my experience is England's green. It's green. If a foreigner said, "What's England?" I would say it's green fields with nothing in them, because some of them do have cows and sheep, but most of them don't have anything in them. They're just growing grass. Now, there are lots of reasons for that. And of course, the grass will be cut and fed to animals and so on. But lying behind it is the reason that land in England is worth so much. You don't didn't really matter what you do with it. It's going up in price. And also, I think there's a kind of conspiracy by the landowning classes of Britain, which includes companies and stuff, but it really is the people who've owned the land since the beginning, since William the Conqueror. Let's keep it all pretty much the same. And in a way, this is marvelous. I mean, if you fly over England in a small plane, it is all green. You can hardly see the roads. Towns hardly make any difference. People who live in towns think they're the bee's knees, but it's really mostly green. And it's kind of puzzling because you think, why aren't they growing more vegetables? Why are we flying them in on airplanes? And why aren't people able to build their little houses and obviously despoil this landscape, but it would bring down house prices. So there are all sorts of contradictory things going on. But yeah, mainly green. The other things? I was going through the Brexit. It was right in the middle of Brexit. I expected to sort of get more kind of feel for that. Not really. As with all trips, you discover most people, 98% of people, are really nice and want to help you. It's heartening in that sense. The biggest surprise for me, I think, though, was obviously I knew this. As you went further north, traffic would decrease, but it really decreases. And if you go up north of sort of Derbyshire, traffic really decreases. It's much more pleasant to live up north. Downside is somewhere like Yorkshire, the biggest county in England, and it's a big part of the walk going through Yorkshire, the difference between rich and poor is far more pronounced than it is in the south. That is true.
You have some fairly choice words to say about landowners who don't mark footpaths and people on horseback. Would you like to make your views clear?
Yeah, I mean, if you own land and you have walkers going through it, it makes sense to really liberally signpost. And there was one bit of the walk, part of the St. Cuthbert's Way, so they get quite a few walkers. And this guy had very sensibly created a kind of tunnel through his land, just two barbed wire fences. You're in the middle of it, and you just get funneled straight through his land. What a sensible chap! He's bowed to the inevitable. You're going to get stupid walkers, but you want to keep them on track. But there are other people. And the other problem is that, there's one place where I got told off by a farmer's wife. I said, you should put a sign. And she said, our sign got stolen. And I think, right, what idiot would steal a sign? So I'm dubious about that. But the second thing was I was being punished for the sign stealer. I was like the sign stealer in absence. So really strange emotions get sort of stirred up by signage and walking. And horseback, well, during the walk, I met a hipster on a horseback who could hardly ride. And he was a lovely, gentle fellow who just let me get out of the way. But mostly on horseback, you're meeting, well, I have to say it's not always women, but it's mainly women who've started at a pretty young age on ponies, and they've learned this kind of body language of horse riding, which is, I'm superior. You are a mere foot soldier. I am the cavalry. Get out of my fucking way. And sometimes shouted at. I mean, one time I was actually shouted at by a woman when I thought I was trying to sort of make way for her skittish pony, and it's not what you want, really.
We apologise, ladies and gentlemen, for the foul language. Robert is a man of advanced views and the means by which to communicate them. You have a lovely line which has resonated with me since I read this book, admittedly some weeks ago now, and I may mangle it, but forgive me if I do. I think it's around page 90. You say there is no madness in no madness.
There's no madness like no madness.
No madness like no madness. Sorry, forgive me. I knew I got it wrong. What do you mean like that? What do you mean by that? Sorry.
What I mean is, and you can get obsessed with the idea that you're a nomad. I mean, Bruce Chatwin, he wrote a whole book about this, The Songlines, wonderful book. But I think quite early on, you start to incline in your self-image. Am I a settler or am I a nomad? And some people are very happy to be settlers and really do want to put down roots and be the pillar of the community. And there are other people who, perhaps they're also characterized as outsiders or whatever, see themselves as nomads. But you can carry that notion a little bit far, and it can sort of overtake you, and that's the nomadness. So there's no madness like no madness. And you see it with people who are walking around the world. I've got a couple of friends right now who are walking around the world. It's kind of nomadness in a way. I mean, I admire them immensely at the same time, but there's a strain of obsession and madness in there too.
Yeah, I mean, any journey requires a certain level of hope, which can be madness. Can you talk us through, because it was an extraordinarily long walk, it's an extraordinary journal of a walk in many ways, and I love the fact that within the book, The Great North Line, you muse about on how what your emotions are like as you're going through different areas, how the emotions change on depending on energy levels, on weather, and all sorts of things. But underpinning it, I had in the back of my mind whether this is a treatise on whether it is better to travel than to arrive. You were a little bit disappointed by Lindisfarne. Can you talk us through how you deal with that concept of the journey for the journey's sake, and the destination is just the end of the journey, not necessarily the point, whether in terms of this book or whether in terms of Voyager, what you've learned about this concept?
It's certainly true. Because you've built it up in your own mind, you do imagine the final point will be jubilation. I remember one of the first walks I did was mainly the GR10 across the Pyrenees. Arriving at the Atlantic, I thought, oh, I'll go just run into the Atlantic. It'd be like a sort of commercial. I just sat on the beach, sort of staring rather glumly at the sea. And I think actually that's happened a number of times, the sense of not total letdown, but just absolute flatness, neither elation nor depression. And I feel that now that signifies you put everything you could into it. You've just used every emotion and there's nothing left over. So you're not disappointed, you're just flat. And that's now I now know that's kind of a good sign. It means that you used everything. Whereas if you feel really elated, it means you've got a little bit left over in the tank.
I rather like that. It's like the sports stars. You leave it on the pitch. If you come off and you've still got enough energy not to be exhausted in the dressing room afterwards, you haven't put your heart and soul into it. I've not thought about it in those terms. I like that very much, Robert. A quick couple of final questions. You went to Balliol, Oxford, and read engineering, but then switched to politics and philosophy. When did you realize you were a writer? When did the writing start?
When I was at school, I was going on the science side, and I thought I would be a scientist. I had an uncle who was a scientist I was very impressed with, and I was sort of all set to do engineering, and then I inexplicably, I got very interested in poetry, and started writing poetry, and it gradually didn't seem a sensible thing to do, but it carried on right to Oxford. And then I thought also the other thing was I was not good enough at maths. I had to do the maths as a walk in the park, as it had been at school, required going to lectures and actually studying. And I thought, Jesus Christ, am I going to spend 3 years doing this? Whereas PPE, you didn't have to get to any lectures, and it was philosophy. And I had become very interested in philosophy. So that's why I did that. But the writing, I'd just become, it was poetry initially, got very interested in poetry, and then, it just developed from there.
Final question from me, and I found myself guilty of this myself, so apologies. The use of the word eccentric in any sentence that includes the words Robert and Twigger. You have a view on eccentricity. Could you expound on it for us, please?
Well, I have a very positive view of eccentricity. I was slightly stunned when I was described as eccentric author by a Times interviewer, and at that time I was trying to present myself as non-eccentric. I now realize that is that's a battle I'm never going to win. I am eccentric, but I embrace it because I think there's a strange power in eccentricity, that you've come to terms with the fact that you're different, and the world is made up of a huge number of different people, and we have to celebrate our difference and revel in it. And the more you can sort of see that there is this power in eccentricity that it is really it's empowering. And there's a fascinating study by an Edinburgh scientist, and he's American, based in Edinburgh, Stuart Weeks. I think I got the name right, but he wrote a book called The Eccentrics, which is a wonderful study of eccentricity and eccentrics, and they are generally much happier than the general spread of the population. I'm talking about a proper British eccentric here. I'm not talking about someone who's a kind of weirdo. Just somebody who has their own way of doing things, their own way of looking at the world and what have you. And I just think a lot of my uncles, my great uncles, were like that. I think a lot of people in Britain were like that before our culture generally started to exert it. I mean, if we're all watching the same telly programs and the same books, and you may argue, okay, the internet allows differences, but actually also the internet allows us to focus on a very few films or a very few books at any one time for most people, and I think it's just really unhealthy. So I'm a general massive fan of eccentricity.
I have to ask you, because you set it up and I'm not going to let it go. Where's the line between weirdo and eccentric, Robert?
Okay, it's a fine line. It's a damn fine line. Eccentrics tend to be very easy to get on with other people, want to expound their worldview because they think it will help other people, but in a benign way and not in a kind of bitter and twisted way. They actually feel that they're happier and they've found something they want to share. Whereas I would say a weirdo feels bad about himself and probably wants to put other people down, and generally thinks that he's better but hasn't much to show for it, and I think that it's to do with some sort of optimism and general creativity, perhaps being more creative. I don't know.
I've never asked that question before. That's a really nice distinction. I like that very much indeed. It's to do with happiness. I like anything to do with happiness right now. Just finally from me, what are you working on now? What can we expect from the pen of Robert Twigger in the months ahead?
In the months ahead, well, I've got, there's always, all right. By the time you've been at it this long, there's always tons of stuff kicking around, but it's all about the bloody publishers. Will they put it out?
That's going to win them over.
Yeah, that's going to win them, bastard. I'm going to do I've got a book about the desert that I've already written.
Yep.
I have a book I've done called Zen Slacker, which is an ebook, and it's a very small book about what to do when you're doing nothing. It would have been perfect for lockdown. I should have got it out. 101 things to do when you're actually doing nothing. And I might do an illustrated version of that. That's what I'm thinking. So it's a kind of, yeah.
I look forward to that. Robert, thank you so much for coming to join us on Lockdown LitFest. It's lovely to see you alive, well, and looking so hale and hearty. Ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't discovered Robert Twigger yet, this is the book to discover him with. Walking the Great North Line. It looks like we may be locked down a little less and could go on staycations within the United Kingdom. Some of you may find it inspiring to walk part of the Great North Line, Cuthbert's Trail, and various other parts in between. If you haven't discovered Robert's writing, he's had this sort of praise. Esquire magazine wrote, Robert Twigger is not so much a travel writer as a thrill-seeking philosopher. Whereas Philip Pullman wrote, a brilliant idea, utterly convincing, superbly carried through. And then there's Will Self, who describes Robert as wholly original, a tour de force, which is sort of Will calling Robert an eccentric. Whereas the New York Times called Robert deliriously clever. The book is called Walking the Great North Line. It's published by Weidenfeld and Nicholson. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to make a small announcement. We've been working now for nearly 4 months, pro bono, offering this service for free. We've been working so hard. We're a very small team of many fewer than 10. We do have a Patreon button beneath us, this screen, somewhere on the website. If you'd like to hit it and make a contribution, the sort of money you might have paid for a real-world festival, but rather than sitting in a field, we were able to provide you this entertainment while you're sitting at home on your sofa. It would be nice to have some help. It would be nice to feel supported, and it would be lovely to hear from you. We'd like to hear your feedback too. info@lockdownlitfest.com. Let us know what you think we're getting right. Let us know what you think we're getting wrong. We're doing this for you guys. We're doing this to provide entertainment, to promote books, promote authors, to help the independent publishers, the main publishers, and independent booksellers. We're trying to do a lot with a small team. We're working all the hours God sends. Please show us some support. It would be very gratefully received. Robert Twigger, thank you so much for coming to join us. It's been a real honor to have you on Lockdown LitFest. And as ever, ladies and gentlemen, keep well, keep safe, and carry on being careful. Cheerio.